Hello everyone, this is Joey Salsi Maghinay, and for today's video, let's talk about Biogeochemical Cycle. Before we start, take a look at this picture. This is George Rhodes, the one who made giant kinetic sculpture at museum where billiard balls are lifted up and they move down again. He invented that and has installed lots of those around the world. Here is a planning documents. In this one, he is trying to show how energy from the sun or within the earth can drive things like the water cycle and the rock cycle. And it is really good model for how nutrients move around on our planet. The carbon and the nitrogen that we have is set and it just moves around between living and non-living world. And so the matter on our planet is conserved, we have to set amount in it moves between biotic or livings and abiotic world. The living world is called biosphere on our planet, and the nutrients that we need are best remembered in these mnemonics. Synopsis: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. If we look at abiotic factors, that is going to be the atmosphere, lithosphere, and hydrosphere. And so these biogeochemical cycles are going to be how the nutrients are moved between the living and non-living. Now, why it is such a long word? Bio, geo, and chemical are the biological, chemical, and geological process by which the nutrients move around. You are probably most familiar with the water cycle. We will start there, then talk about carbon cycle and following nitrogen cycle. One thing you are probably not familiar with the nitrogen cycle is the importance of bacteria and how they can nitrogen fix or take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and put it into living world. We will then move to the phosphorus one, or the slowest turning cycle. It involves rock but no atmosphere. Now, both nitrogen and phosphorus are what are called limiting nutrients. That means life really needs them and is waiting for them. And once it gets true nutrients, then it goes really quickly. It is a good thing, but sometimes can lead to purification. And then finally, we will finish with the sulfur cycle. And so the synergy on how our planet, remember, starts in the sun, moves through producers to consumers, other consumers, and eventually is a loss as heat. But as we move to matter, everything on our planet is conserved. There is no sun anymore. And so how do the producers get nutrients that they need? It is from their environment, from the atmosphere, from the hydrosphere, from the lithosphere. How do consumers get the matter they need? By eating plants or eating consumers that they eat plants. How does the matter go back into the environment again? Through this biochemical cycle. And so, what are the nutrients that life needs? What are the billiard balls of life? Well, a good mnemonics is CHNOPS: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. If we organize that into give cycle, we have the water cycle, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, oxygen cycle, phosphorus cycle, and sulfur cycle. So why do we need all this matter? We are filled with water. We also use the oxygen to release energy and transfer energy with hydrogen. We are built with macromolecules. That is what carbon is a building block of. The nitrogen and the sulfur are both big components in the proteins that make us up. And then the phosphorus is found in DNA, RNA, and the ATP. And so if we do not have these nutrients, we do not have these atoms, then life cannot exist. So we need to pull out of our environment. So let's start with the water cycle. How do plants get water? They are going to take it in through roots. What about the cow? They simply going to drink the water. But how does it move through the abiotic parts of our planet? First of all, we are going to have evaporation of ocean, lakes, and then we are going to have evapotranspiration. So it is evaporating, but also it is being transpired through the leaves of a plant. It is now moving from liquid to gas. What eventually happens is that we are going to have condensation in the clouds. We have precipitation, and then we have runoff over the surface and through groundwater, and the whole thing begins again. If we start with carbon, how does a plant get carbon? It is going to be through photosynthesis, both in plant on land and then phytoplankton that are going to be found in the ocean. What about an animal like this cow? It simply gets the carbon through its diet. It eats the plant, or if something eats a cow like you're taking the carbon from the meat of the cow. So what happened to that carbon? It eventually released through cellular respiration. It goes back into the atmosphere again as carbon dioxide. So a lot of that is going to be in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Now we can also take that carbon and it can be covered by rock and we can create coal, oil, and fossil fuels. So we are storing that carbon in the rock. We can extract it by digging as well. And then we have the combustion where factory releases that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere and the whole cycle continues again. The nitrogen cycle is a little different. Most of the nitrogen is going to be found in the atmosphere as nitrogen gas. And to get it to the living system, we have to do nitrogen fixation. So there are bacteria that live lots of times on the roots of plants in this nodule that they are converting the nitrogen in the atmosphere into usable ammonia. We could also put ammonia on our fields as fertilizer, and then it is going to be assimilated. In other words, plants are going to take it in through by roots, and we are going to get it by plants simply by eating them. Now, how does it get returned back to atmosphere? It is kind of complex. What happens is we have death, we have decay, and so bacteria or fungi are going to convert that nitrogen into ammonium. And then we have other bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, that are going to convert that ammonium into nitrites and then nitrates. Now that nitrates can be reached, they can move into the water supply of our planet. Remember, nitrogen is a limited nutrient. Plants, life is just waiting for nitrogen to be there. And once we get nitrogen, for example in this stream, you will get an algae bloom. We will get a bunch of algae growing really. Now that seems like a good thing, but all of those algae are going to quickly die. And eutrophication is the process by which they die and then other bacteria have to break them down through respiration. And it consumes all of the oxygen, so it is not healthy for the water supply. But let's keep watching the nitrogen. How does it get back into the atmosphere? We will have denitrifying, that we're going to return it back into the atmosphere, and so the whole thing can begin again. Now the phosphorus cycle is going to turn more slowly. It starts by having rock that have a phosphorus being uplifted. We then have weathering and erosion, and that is going to move the phosphorus into the soil, into water supply. We could also add fertilizers. That is going to have phosphorus, and the whole thing, since it is limiting, can promote eutrophication. And what happened to the phosphorus? The assimilation where it is taken into plants. We can eat the plants and we get it. What eventually happens is we die. So through excretion and decay, we return that phosphorus into the water supply. It eventually works its way to ocean, and then it eventually settles out in these sediments. And so it never goes to the atmosphere. It becomes part of these phosphate rocks, which are then uplifted again. And finally, we have sulfur cycle. Sulfur cycle is going to move from the oceans to sulfur. We have bacteria that are going to convert that into the methyl sulfide, which eventually becomes sulfur oxide or sulfur dioxide. We can also increase sulfur dioxide through volcanism. So volcanoes release hydrogen sulfide, which become sulfur dioxide. And then factories are going to release sulfur dioxide as well. It is in the atmosphere now. How does it get back to the planet? It is going to rain down as sulfuric acid and sulfates. We can then assimilate that, take it into the living materials, same way into plants and then into consumers. And finally, it works its way back through the water supply, and now it's going to be the sulfur in the ocean. So cycle can continue again, but we can also have the rock cycle, forming some of that into fossil fuels, which can be extracted again, and the cycle continues. And so for each of the cycle, you should be able to figure out how plants get it, how do animals get it, and then does it recycle back through the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and lithosphere. So thank you for watching.